Sourdough. It's really become hip these last couple of years. But your boy Ro has been killing sourdough starters way before it was trendy to keep them alive. Despite what you might think, sourdough isn't something that hipsters invented during lockdown. It's the OG way of making bread. It's how your mama's mama, and before that, her mama's mama's mama used to make bread. In fact, that's how we've been making bread for about 5,000 years. And maybe that's why there's something deeply satisfying in baking a sourdough loaf. But before we can do that, we have to create a starter. That living colony of natural yeasts and bacteria that will help leaven our bread and give it that signature flavor. And I'll also show you a few things you can make with the leftover starter after feeding it instead of throwing it out. Because I'm nice like that. Now put your horn rim glasses and your plaid shirts on, it's time to make sourdough. Let's roll! All we need is some flour, I got some all-purpose and some rye flour, and some water. To make your life easy, find some sort of a measuring unit that you can stick to. Get yourself a container as well, duh, preferably with a lid. I measured out 1 big cup, which for the purpose of this video we're gonna call 1 unit of the all-purpose flour, which came up to about 65 grams. You can go with all-purpose flour only, but I'd recommend mixing in some whole grain or rye flour as well, because the yeasts like it rough. I measured out a half unit of the rye flour, which came up to about 35 grams. That gives us a total of 100 grams of flour, to which we're gonna add 100 mils or 1 unit of cold water, and I know that it's 100 mils because the cup is 1 deciliter. We've mixed in equal parts flour and water, which in baking lingo is called 100% hydration. You want to keep the sourdough starter aerated the first few days of its life, so cover the container with either a cloth or some kind of a breathable paper. I'm just gonna use a coffee filter, and we're doing that because we want to capture as much of the natural yeast that is all around us, but keep the starter protected as well at the same time. Good morning. It's been about 18 hours and not much has happened. It's time to feed our starter for the first time. We'll top it up with a fresh unit of all-purpose flour, half a unit of rye flour, and 1 unit of cold water. So we've essentially now doubled it in size. Depending on your environment and ambient temperature, you can have a sourdough starter established in anywhere between several days and a couple weeks. Feeding your starter takes only a couple minutes of your day, so it's something you can do while you're waiting for your morning coffee. It's the next morning and it's time to feed our starter.
Whoa dude, check it out bruh. It's doubled in size, man.
What happens in there is the natural yeast and bacteria are feeding on the carbohydrates in the flour, breaking them down into sugars, and they're metabolizing that, producing beautiful farts. All of those gases are what leavens our bread and makes it light and fluffy. Now, before we feed the starter again, we're gonna take out half. And that's basically something that you'll do every time you feed it. That's just volume control, otherwise in a week you'll need a barrel and not a jar. But you don't have to discard it. I'll give you a few different ideas that I'd like to do with the leftover starter. So the remaining half of the starter, we're gonna feed with a fresh half, which is 100 grams of flour and 100 mils of water. Which means that I'm maintaining a total of 400 grams of starter, throwing out half every day and topping up with a fresh half. But that's just me. You can scale this operation up and down as much as you want, as long as you keep the proportions. And experiment with different mixtures of flour, try different ratios. Okay, bye, see you tomorrow. It's day 4, and let's have a look at our starter. It's still risen, but not nearly as much as it did the previous day. And by now, it should smell like beer and fresh yeast. Then we're just gonna perform our daily routine of taking out half of the starter and feeding the rest. As your new pet starts coming to life, things are gonna start getting exciting and you're gonna wanna start keeping track. Here's a little tip. Instead of marking the container, you can put an elastic band around it. As the starter rises, it's gonna leave a mark. Then you can compare that to the band and see how much it's risen. So smart, Ro. I know. It's the next morning and, well, I have to say I was hoping for a little more, but nothing unusual in the life of a young sourdough. It's full of activity, it looks good, smells good, so we're just gonna move on to our daily routine of emptying and feeding. The measuring band goes back on, as well as its little paper hat, and we're gonna move on with our day, hoping that tomorrow brings us a little bit more excitement. Day 6, excitement. This could be you. If that happens, and after a few days your starter starts looking like there's something going wrong, there isn't. Get your schnoz in there and see what you can find. Nail polish? Good. Cheese? Bad. So we're gonna suppress our mild panic attack and feed our starter as usual. You'll see, after a few days it's gonna come back stronger than ever. It always does. At this point, you're gonna start getting to know your starter. I thought mine looked a little thin for my liking, so I gave it just like a teaspoon more flour. Yep, that looks better to me. Take it from me, every time I've started a new sourdough, there's this little dip in, let's say, performance. It's like a period of adjustment, but after a week or so, it really starts taking off. You just need to be patient and be on top of your feeding. And speaking of feeding, that is exactly what we're gonna do the following day as well. By the way, once you have an active starter, and if you're not baking every day, which you won't be, you can just keep it in the fridge and feed it once a week.
1 week later.
Fast forward to day 14, and at a first glance, things don't seem to have changed much. You would think that the starter also looks pretty much the same, but you'd be wrong. Let me just feed it real quick and I'll show you how much things have changed. Where last week we would only get a couple of centimeters of rise overnight, here's what happens now, only after a couple of hours. Meet Mac 5, or just Mac, because you should name your starter, and mine has always been called Mac. And 5 because I've already had 4 starters that went for a walk. Anyway, if you're not sure whether your starter is ready to bake, here's a little test you can do. Drop a little bit in a bowl of water, and if it floats, then it's full of gas and it's ready to be used. Not that there was any doubts about this one. You can literally hear it and see it breathing. So I thought I'd take it out for a test run.
Later that same evening.
Obviously I'm gonna do a dedicated video, but I just wanted to show you this. There are very few feelings that compare to the one that you get from the smell of freshly baked sourdough that fills your home. It's definitely something that you have to experience for yourselves. Listen, listen, you can hear it crackling. The problem is that now you have to let it rest for at least half an hour. I've heard people say, yeah, you have to leave it to cool down completely. Nah, you still want it warm, because then you can do this. As for the leftover starter, instead of throwing it out when feeding, one option is one of these savory spring onion and savory pancakes. Another option is Boza, probably the best vehicle for crushing some hot banitsa. But you can expect a dedicated video on those as well. And last but definitely not least, these little sourdough fritters. All they need is a drizzle of honey and a pinch of sea salt, and you get transported to food heaven. Yeah, I mean, go make some sourdough. This is the bomb. Roll out!